We're going to move along now and talk about field properties. Field properties are the details of defining how each of the fields in the tables work. And the beauty of that is that when you define the field properties correctly, there are different advantages that you get from that. One is that it allows you to specifically define what the users of your database system will enter and make it more exact. Another feature of working with field properties is that it can make your database more efficient by defining the correct sizes for fields. And another feature is that you can define how things will be displayed once they're in the fields. The best way to show this is just look at a table. So we're going to look at the design of the students table. And you notice here we have three different data types. We of course have the auto number, and the field properties that I'm going to talk about are down at the bottom here. So each different data type has their own field properties. You notice with auto number, you get these here. If I scroll down, you get a lot more properties with text, and you get some slightly different properties with date time. If you look at auto number, you don't have many fields that you could change. And I would say with auto number being the primary key, you really don't often want to change anything in here. I will point out one thing you could do is with new values, if you look at this one right here, you could change this from an increment field to a random number field. And it says here, once you save the change, you will not be able to change back. We're not going to change it for right now, but what that would do is change it so that incrementing by 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It would just create random numbers. You could do that, but there's not necessarily any reason to do that. I'm going to look closer actually at short text. I think there's a lot in here to cover. Okay, with text fields, you'll notice here the default for a short text field is 255. That's the maximum amount of characters it can hold. But realistically, with a first name, are you ever going to need 255 characters? That's very, very unlikely. So you're going to set it to something that makes more sense. Just backspace, and typically maybe a name. Commonly, names wouldn't be over 20. You could set it at 20 like that. So when you make it 20 like that, it will only allow 20 characters and would never allow it to go above that. If you want to make it a little higher, that's perfectly fine. One of the reasons you don't want to leave it at 255, a lot of your fields, is because it's inefficient for your database. It takes up wasted space to account for holding up to 255 characters when you're never going to use that much. So you would want to change field sizes to be what you think is appropriate. In the next one here, format, you get a drop-down arrow, but it really does, you're not going to see any options here under text. But you can actually format. And I have a link in the glossary that I have for the course. I hope you've found and used the glossary that I created. There's a link in there that shows you some options for what you can do to format. Format is just going to format how it's displayed. And if I look here at the link that I have that Microsoft created, it says specify format for text and memo data types. And we're going to try a couple of these. For instance, this one here, this caret, a left-facing caret symbol here, used to force all text to lowercase, or the opposite, the right-facing one, used to force all text to uppercase. There's other options in here. You could read through these and try these. Let's just try what we did there with lowercase. So if I go back to Access and I put in the left-facing caret and go to Datasheet View, it's going to save my change. Also it tells me, this is an interesting note here, some data may be lost. Because we changed the size of the field from 255 to 20, it's saying, well, if we have names that are greater than 250 or greater than 20, anything above 20 will be lost. Access is going to make that change, but it says I'm going to truncate it if it's larger than that. We should be okay, so let's say yes. And so you see, you're not seeing the data size change, but you are seeing that it's done lowercase. If I were to add a new record here, it won't allow more than 20 characters. It'll stop. You can see there, it just won't let me do that. So that's another feature of field properties. Let's go back, look at design, and look at a few more. I'm going to get rid of that formatting. And input mask, I'm going to describe more when we look at the phone number field. With caption, and what it is, and with all these properties, they're defined more on the right side. Caption is just a label for the field when used on a view. If you don't enter a caption, the field name is used as the label. The captions can be useful, especially for the user of your database, to give more information. They're not necessary, but they can be useful. Default value would be a value that is automatically entered in this field for new items. Now, when you're talking about a first name, what would be a default value? It doesn't make any sense because everybody has a different name. You may have a few, people named John or Mary or whatever, but for something like that, you wouldn't have a default value. I'll show that later with a different field where that would be more useful. A validation rule is an expression that limits the values that can be entered. Again, with name, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but I mean, if we click this, you could build an expression and you could build something that says, well, if last name equal Johnson, first name must equal Janet. And that, again, that doesn't make any sense, but that's the kind of thing you can do. It might make more sense with some of the number fields. I'm not going to expect you with the database to build any validation rules right now, but I want you to be aware that they're out there. With required here, that makes a lot of sense to use with the name field. Anytime you're going to enter a student, you're going to have to enter a first name and a last name. So for something like that, yeah, we would want to change that to yes. And so it's first name is always required. Some of these other properties, I'm not going to explain right now. You could look them up in your textbook. At this time, they're not that important. I will say index can be useful, especially with large databases. And index speeds up searches and sorting on the field, but may slow updates. I'm not going to require that with the database you submit. Before we finish with the field properties for text fields, I do want to go back and look at something with phone number. We skipped over earlier the input mask, and this can be really useful for something like a phone number or a zip code, and I'll demonstrate it here. Input mask is a pattern for all data to be entered in this field. And if we look at phone number, I'm going to go back to datasheet view. I haven't entered any, but if I entered one, right now I could enter almost anything. I mean, I can enter 773, something like that. I could enter 773-555-4545. I could enter just 555-4545 without a zip code. There's all kinds of things. In fact, because it's a text field, I could just enter something like that and it accepts it. So we want to make it more user-friendly. I'm going to get rid of some of the data in here and show you how this would work. If we go back and look at input mask for phone number, click that, it's going to give me something here, an input mask wizard. And you can see there's some predefined formats for phone number, zip code, etc. Even for a password. With a password field, if you were prompting for that, Maybe you want it to not display any of the characters that a user is entering. So like often on websites or when you log into the computer, it's masking what you put in the password. Microsoft Access has the same feature that you could set up. If we do phone number here, and I say try it, what it's going to do, let's say again 773 555 4545. You'll see what it does. It nicely displays it so that for the user that's inputting it, it clearly shows what's the area code and the way a phone number is typically formatted in the United States. So that looks good to me. If I click next, and it's going to give me more options. The placeholder character is just what displays to prompt for getting your numbers. And I'm going to explain in a minute what the 999 and the zero, the nines and the zeros do. Let's click next. And how do you want to store the data? Usually it's best to store it without the symbols. So it's going to store it as a complete number without any parentheses or dashes in there or spaces. Click next and finish. And you see it's actually put that input mask in here. I have a link that defines all this a lot more in the glossary. I have that link that gives you all of this information, and here's more of the symbols that you can use. Some are for text, some are for number. You'll notice here, just in a nutshell, what it's done. A 9 is a number that's not required, but it does have to be a number. A 0 is a number that is required. So this is actually setting it up so that it does not require an area code, but it does require the rest of the number. I'm actually going to change that, put a 000, so that the whole number is required, including the area code. So that's an overview of the field properties for text fields. With the assignment you turn in for this module where you're working on your database and the database that you turn in based on your design, I'm going to expect you to change some of these properties, and it's all spelled out in the assignment, but definitely you are going to have to change the size of some of the fields. You're definitely going to have to set some fields as required. If you have a phone number, for instance, or a zip code, you're going to have to change that and set up an input mask. There are some other requirements in there too, but that's all discussed in the assignment.